Well, I am glad to welcome and delighted to welcome Brad Dood to today's show. Welcome, Brad. Brad has spent his career providing leadership training, organizational development consulting, program evaluation, coaching, and project management services to the US government agencies, public and non-profit organizations, and private sector enterprises in more than 30 countries and territories around the world. He's the co-developer of the Basic Elements of Temperament, a model that explores how interpersonal temperament influences the behaviours of leaders, managers, and employees. And he's written 6 books on leadership and conducts seminars and workshops on temperament. And for over 40 years in more than 30 territories and countries around the world, Brad has provided leadership training, organisational development, programme evaluation, workforce training, coaching, and the list goes on. As an owner of Brad Dood and Associates Inc., Brad continues to work and partner with colleagues at Next Level Consulting, the Ascend Development Group, and other organisations to provide consulting training services for his clients. And he's recently served as coordinator of an executive leadership program for government employees from Micronesia and Polynesia. He's also the principal in DevBiz Experts, a new company that provides services for non-profit, government, and private sector organisations. And he lives in New Orleans with his wife Sue, and he has 1 son and 3 grandsons. So, Brad, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm exhausted just hearing your background.
Yeah, it's funny how these things build up, isn't it? They kind of, when you look back at something like that and you read it out, you think, oh goodness me, that's quite a lot. I remember I was re-looking at some stuff on I think it was, you do your internal CV updates and things like that, and looking back over some history once, and I was like, whoa, I've forgotten about half of these things. So tell us a little bit more about you.
Well, you already said a lot, actually, but we stand on the shoulders of others. We go through a career. I've had great mentors and great people I work with all over the world. I've been very lucky. I started kind of getting into management and leadership when I was with the U.S. Peace Corps program out in Micronesia. I was a volunteer for a few years and then into training of new volunteers and local folks. And really enjoyed it. I would spend about most of the 70s, I guess, in the Pacific doing a variety of kinds of training and things like that. Came back to the States and then got involved with the Westinghouse company that was doing international training and management, project management. I got to go to Gaza and work with Palestinians as well as Israelis. And so I've been really lucky. Got to travel quite a bit and see a lot. And that kind of stimulated my interest in writing, kind of writing it down. And you have some time when you're on the road so much to jot down some of the takeaways. And I kind of finally put all that together and started to write some books about leadership.
Brilliant. And I think we were talking before the show, and I think one of the things that you highlighted and thing that popped up from our back and two conversations was around the fact that you focus on temperament, and I've looked at lots of different behavioural styles. I've looked at lots of different brain's gone on it now.
Myers-Briggs and social style. There are so many. There are so many.
Yeah, the disc profiles and things like that. That's one I use a lot because I find that very simple to use and how it fits in my brain actually. And I've mentioned it all the time on this blooming show. But from a term of temperament, I've not heard that before. In terms of temperament, so that really piqued my interest talking to you. So just before we get into where we see how that affects and things like that, what was it that triggered you to think about focusing on temperament? And I suppose, what is temperament from your perspective?
Well, temperament is that inborn quality that influences how we view the world. The research that my co-writer of our first book on it, Jim Harden, he and I both did training a lot and with the Navy and with NASA. And we would ask folks, our participants, about things like DISC or Myers-Briggs and say, okay, Myers-Briggs, how many of you took Myers-Briggs? Oh, and they all raised their hands. Said, okay, how many remember what your letters are? And hands would go down.
Mm.
And okay, the ones that were remaining is, well, how many of you can tell me what those letters represent? And even more hands would go down. So what we found, not only Myers-Briggs, a lot of the others, sometimes hard to remember, what it all means. And so Jim and I believed that we needed a even a more simple way of thinking about it. Um, and we wanted to be in our approach was similar to some of these other models. I mean, we didn't invent temperament. Um, but what got our participants as they became new leaders in trouble was their shadow temperament, the knee-jerk reaction to behaviors they saw in the workplace that got them in trouble. And so we did more and more research on it and basically came up with our approach. We call it the basic elements of temperament. And we use earth, air, fire, and water as the four basic temperaments that we're all born, we all have them in us. We're all born with them. And a simple way of looking at it, the way we described it was like dinner plates in a restaurant stacked on top of each other. You have four plates. Your top plate is your dominant temperament. That's the one that you're most like, the one you want to be perceived by others as having. That's how you view the world, through that dominant temperament, whichever one it is, and it could be any of the four: earth, air, fire, or water. Then you have a secondary temperament that supports often that dominant temperament. And people sometimes get confused. They say, well, I've got two dominant temperaments. We say, no, research says you don't. You have one, but the secondary is very close and it supports kind of how you view the world. The third plate, or tertiary temperament of that stack, is kind of neutral. When you see that behavior, it doesn't register any emotion typically with you. The fourth one, the shadow temperament, whichever one that is for you, earth, air, fire, or water, could be any of the four, that's the one that gets us in trouble the most. That's the one it's our least preferred temperament. It's the one whose behavior we see in our boss, in our colleagues, in our spouse, in our partner, that ticks us off. In fact, the
Mm.
book that Jim and I, first book on temperament we wrote was What Makes You Tick and What Ticks You Off. And it's a
Yeah, I love
way
it.
of
Love
kind of
it.
better understanding kind of what's going on. And for new leaders, self-awareness to me is probably the most important skill that you have to have.
Yeah, that's it. I can see where it comes from. It's kind of and kind of the echoes of the disc model sort of stuff. It's like obviously different, but the way that I describe whenever I talk to people about the disc model is um, when you have that opposite, because of the square sort of thing, they have the opposite one, which is the one that kind of is encounter to you, that is kind of equivalent to your shadow one that you're talking about there. I always describe that as that's the as a crude way so people remember it, really is the fact that that's why you think they're a dickhead and why they think you're a dickhead. And
Mhm.
that's kind of, and that self-awareness of knowing that that person will react to me in a way because of the way that I generally prefer to behave means that I can modify and I can understand when they're behaving, that they're not behaving to me, they're behaving how they behave, and I can adjust me. Again, both of those are all about that self awareness that you said.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And our model, which I think is consistent with DISC and the others, we emphasize work on the shadow. And of course, our idea is to be a good leader, you need to develop all four of your temperaments. And so our workshops focus a lot on not only understanding what those temperaments are, but especially focusing on the shadow. And the shadow's got a positive as well as a negative side to it. And the positive side, which is oftentimes not thought about, is kind of our undiscovered talents, things that we wish we could do more of, but just life gets in the way and we just don't get to it. And so we also promote that as a way of developing your shadow temperament as well as increasing awareness of the negativity that often, as you describe, often comes up when we see behaviors from that shadow temperament that ticks us off.
Never thought of it like that. It's that kind of a little bit stepping out of your comfort zone, isn't it? It's that I suppose if you've got like that kind of outgoing kind of person, I'm not sure the thing, but if you've got an outgoing person, then being outgoing and chatting in the room is quite straightforward and simple. But sitting and listening to everyone else and keeping your gob shut can be really, really challenging, but really powerful tool that you can, as a leader, can be really useful to be able to exercise. I know that's one that for me, not contributing to a conversation is harder for me than contributing to a conversation. That's hence the reason I have a podcast. I want to talk. Um, but then I know other people there is bringing those people out, stepping out to build in that conversation or to stand in front of a group and present to people can be really hard for them. But again, that's working on that. They're probably the messages they can deliver can be a lot more powerful than the person who's talking all the time.
Sure.
Well,
And, people usually leave their organizations because of their relationship with the boss. And so we spent a lot of time. In fact, I wrote another book on 40 tips for figuring out your boss. What happens when you have an earth boss who is realistic, practical, by the rules, rigid in your mind, and you are not, or if
yeah,
that's your shadow, when you see that kind of behavior, you're ticked off by it. Now you wonder why you're mad at when you come home and you're screaming at your spouse, "What a lousy day we had at the office." That's a contributing factor, and we thought it's important that you kind of understand where that boss is coming from, who a dominant Earth, they value highly protecting their organization, their team, their division, their branch, and they don't want just to change because it sounds like a good idea. They want to see some facts and figures to prove that we should change the way we're doing things because it's gone on like that for a long time and we're successful. Don't rock the boat. And so that conflict comes up often with the participants that I've had in the past in my courses, and we spend some time on it.
yeah, I can see that. And it's one of those things where, and I've said this story before, where I've had someone who I've worked with who's very much worked for me. They're a very detailed person. They're an architect, software architect, brilliant guy, really clever, really bright, way more intelligent than I ever will be. And he sent me something. I said approved within a couple of minutes on email. He comes to me and says, "You haven't read it." He's given me a lot of information, a lot of backing data, a lot of things that I need, or he thought I would need in order to be able to validate it. And I'm like, well, I trust you. You're better than me. I'm happy to sign off and trust you. The other way round, if I'd been doing it, I'd have just gone, "Can you approve this? I'm sure it'll work." And they would have
Yeah,
wanted more data. They would
yeah,
have wanted more due diligence and things like that. Now, and evidence of that even is I could do all the due diligence in the world, but actually writing it down and giving them the evidence is what they would need in order to make those decisions. Um,
yeah. I've had bosses like that. It's the air. It's another one of the temperaments. The air temperament, the air boss. They're into competency. The most important thing they know they could do the job themselves, but they got to put up with these other people. They don't like people that much, and you have to earn their trust. It's not just given because you got to prove you're competent. And if you make a mistake, oftentimes, boy, it takes a long time to recover from an air boss who just thinks that competency is the most important thing in to the organization. They can tell you big picture where this organization ought to go now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and can tell you what's needed, but they're not detail oriented, and they wish that the people they had were much more competent in order to do what they think, is needed. So imagine if you have a boss like that, you're afraid to give him anything, and you check in your work 10 times because an error will make you look like an idiot in front of that boss. So that's another way people have conflict with their bosses.
Yeah, I've found that, and it's probably, I'd say it's probably a similar relationship where historically I've had relationship with a customer who, whilst they're not my boss, but they're my who I'm supplying to, and you can get that situation where um, one minor thing that is slightly wrong, that is kind of, oh, it's flexible, we can be pragmatic, we do that. But if they're not willing to be pragmatic and they want everything to be just right, you do get to the point where you're worried about, and it kind of can stack. I can find myself stagnated, and you're kind of not doing a little bit. You're stuck, not doing anything. And you say with a bot, you do that, and then you're seen as being too slow because you're putting in so much effort to be right, and you're triple checking and quadruple checking and octuple checking.
Yeah.
Whereas in another relationship, you trust your gut and you trust yourself because you know, well, yeah, I know it's right. I had a guy who worked for me who, because of his temperament, he wasn't confident with his finances, and I coached him through it, got him there. But then when he went into a room with someone else to talk about his finances, he immediately went, "Well, I think it's this. I'm not sure. It might be this," and completely undermined his confidence, completely undermined the perception of the people in the room because, and just making me think about it there is talking to me, he probably felt in a safe space. Talking to them, there would have been that, as you just said there about figuring out the boss bit, that
Mm.
boss's boss kind of thing.
Yeah.
They're going to have would have had a different relationship from a temperament point of view with that person when they ask a question and therefore feel different. Which I've talked about that example a multitude times, and I've never thought of it that way. It's really interesting that about how
Yeah.
those different relationships.
It's a fascinating thing. And w- I found that our participants, they really get a lot out of it. It kind of opens their eyes to, oh, that's why that was going on, or that's why I reacted that, or yeah, my boss is an air boss. That's why he can never make a decision because he's reading the fine print on every little thing. It takes
Yeah,
forever to get a decision out of him. Or you might have a fire boss. Fires are kind of like earths. They want to see all the details and all the information so they can make a plan, except the fire wants to have fun doing it and they want to change things around. And the way they did it yesterday, they're going to do it different tomorrow. So you never quite know what this guy's going to do. And he likes to tell jokes and have a good time, but sometimes we miss deadlines and, you know, so you have a whole different scenario and relationship with somebody like that. Or if you have an employee like that, wow, I can never know what they're going to do. They're kind of off the wall and they get it done. They're great troubleshooters, but I never know where they're coming from. So, there's so many different options there that when you talk about temperament.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting. It's just that those different lenses onto it, and then obviously the one we haven't talked about is the water one, which how does that fit in then?
The water one is interesting. They're the people persons. They're much like the heirs. Heirs see the big picture and they wish there were no people involved because they could do it themselves because they're so competent. The waters see the big picture and want to do great things only through other people.
Yeah,
If
right.
there's a policy or if there's a project that gets other people in trouble or screws somebody, they're not for it. They're the people persons, and the boss, a water boss, they're the ones who come late for the meeting because they saw an old friend in the hallway and they're chatting with them while we're all sitting waiting for him or her to come into the room. Uh, the most important thing that they have is the interpersonal relationships, and they get along with the earths, they get along with the airs, they get along with the fires, all very well. They're oftentimes the ones that are called upon to kind of negotiate between them all because they get along with everybody. But it's tough sometimes to have a water boss. You know why? Because they can't say no. Hey, you mind having two of your employees work with us on the weekend on this Sure, that's good for the That's good. I'll be glad to. So you get your boss signing you up for stuff that you didn't count on because they can't say no to anybody. So that's a frustration with the water boss as well. But they're the ones that come in. They have to greet everybody. They know the first name, your first name. They know your spouse's first name. They know your dog's name, and it's like that.
Yeah, they're people who make you feel like you're important to the organisation.
Yeah.
They're the one, like you say, the ones who know everyone's birthday, can make sure that we celebrate it or whatever, understand what people do, don't, and have that. When one of the other ones is pissed off someone else, they're kind of supporting the other one and trying to explain why they're all right. They're not a bad person.
Yeah,
It's quite,
exactly.
yeah. I see those people. And the thing is all of those roles have got massive positive. Um, sorry, all of those temperaments have got massive positive traits, haven't they?
Hmm.
That can deliver amazing results as a manager, or they can flip on the opposite by being too extreme with that side of it and reacting in a different way can cause real problems within an organization. Especially like say if you had a whole team of fire people working together under a fire boss or maybe under a water boss. I don't know. You've got to have that blend, haven't you?
Yes, yes. I mean, I did an exercise in our workshop one time. I had four tables, and all the airs were at one table, all the fires on one table, and they had to put together a Lego man and kind of watch the interplay where the waters were so nice to each other. It was funny where the fires were, let me try this, try that, let me put the head there. No, no, try this, try that. It didn't get done in the time. It was a timed exercise, you know, where the Earths were all kind of looking at the rules and discussing the before they even touched anything. So it is. And, the organization needs all of them. And of course, we have all four temperaments in
Yeah.
ourselves, in all of us. And some will, we start off these works and they deny it. Hey, I'm not a water, no way, but it's there. And
Yeah.
if you don't recognize it, you need to, and you need to work on it to develop it. So we all say, hey, I'm, somebody in the workshop will say, oh, that was a nice thing to do. And the guy will say, yeah, I'm developing my water. So, it's a process, that
Yeah.
you have to go through.
I do like it because that's a nice model there and the description. It's quite an emotive and visual. That connection of the visualization of those different signs kind of give you that um, way. And I suppose, and I've not watched it, but I've seen the clips of it. You've kind of got the is it TV kids show called Elemental? It's a film, a Disney film, I think it is, or maybe a Pixar or whatever.
Yes,
And
yes.
they've got the fire, the water. I think they've got the four
Yeah.
different character
Well,
types.
it's emotions. I saw one recently. They're all about the emotions. It wasn't so much temperament, but they're certainly related to that. They've got six or seven different emotions
Yeah.
of a little girl. I think the first movie, and the second one is of the same girl when she's a teenager, and how
Wow.
different emotions will come up
Yeah.
and kind of materialize from them.
Yeah. It's a good way of that visualization because it does
Yeah.
stick easier than and you see, I still remember when I did Myers Briggs, and I must have done that back in 1990, somewhere between 94 and 2000. So I remember probably at the early end of that. And I remember I came out as a plant and a something else. So immediately I used to remember it. I don't know. I remember the plant one because I knew and I know I wasn't the complete finisher. Was the one definitely know I wasn't. Whilst they were quite good, as you say, there's quite a lot of information and quite a lot of different ones in there. So it was whilst quite useful and quite it does help you to start thinking about it. It's quite hard to visualize those characters, and whereas I think the way you're talking about it's really cool.
Yeah,
How do you work out which one you are? How do you work out yourself? How do you do it?
yeah. Well, the dominant one is a little bit easier because when you start talking about what the characteristics are, you kind of say, "Oh yeah, that's me," or you say, "Oh no, that's not me." So it's kind of the in between, and the shadow is a little bit more difficult. Finally, I did a little quiz. People have kept asking to do some kind of quiz. So I did do a quiz and I put it on my website. And it's just like
See the word quiz
brandnew.com
on the website
slash
now, yeah.
quiz. Yeah.
You see it, yeah.
Um, and it's just a very simple one just to throw you into the categories so you
Yeah.
can kind of take a look. And then it'll link you to a more thorough explanation. And people have enjoyed. It's got just a fun,
Yeah.
way of looking at it.
I'll
Um,
drop a link to the quiz in the show
yeah, yeah,
notes.
that
People can
that's
jump
great.
on and
That's
have a
great.
look.
But
Yeah.
it's funny
Yeah.
when in our workshops when we divide people into the four groups and give them some questions so they can kind of explore the temperament more. Usually in the workshop, somebody will stand up and get up out of that group and say, "No, no, this isn't me," and walk over to another one. So it's kind of a self-discovery. When we have people like I did with NASA for a long time, they all knew each other, and so sometimes they go into the group, and the group will say, "No, no, 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 Nigel, you're in that group over there, not this
Well, that's
group." And so that's kind of it. That's feedback, immediate feedback too, which is kind of interesting. People know you better sometimes than you know yourself.
I've done some 360 feedback type stuff over the years, and the one that they could obviously get others doing that, but what they do will get you to do. I've still got it here somewhere because I found it so interesting. In that I ranked myself in what I thought and what my skills were, and where I excel and things like that. And it was really interesting. Not the confirmation items. It's where and not so much where people ranked me down because that's just kind of understanding really where I've said right, okay, I think I'm this good, and someone said, well, you need a bit more improvement. That's kind of why you're doing it, and are you expecting that? Is where I rank myself low on certain skills, but other people ranked me very high on those skills, and there was two or three of those that I sat there and oh, I never realised that thing, and that I was good at that because it's probably something that I felt difficult. It felt difficult for me to do. It was stretching me in my comfort zone, but actually but I was still performing well, even though it's hard to do. And that's probably sometimes you get that bias, don't you? If it feels hard, then I can't be that good.
Mm,
Whereas actually, it's relative, isn't it? And that external lens from other people is really really powerful because how you're feeling and how you're behaving can be two different things anyway. As you
sure.
said, you've got all of those four traits, and I talk about the when you've got your kid and going for an ice cream, and they step out and going out and they step out onto the road, and how you behave. As from a disc model point of view, you use all four traits to one scream at them, drag them in, cheer them up, buy them a present. I mean, you go through all of those, and you'd go through all of the temperaments.
Yeah,
Yeah. But
yeah.
I guess you wouldn't see me. You wouldn't know how I'm feeling when you see the temperament behaviour.
No,
So there's some um, inconsistency there, isn't
sure, sure. Um, we do a exercise where a guy walks by another person and doesn't, and one person says hello to that person, and the other person got his head down and doesn't doesn't address him. And then we talk about what's wrong with that guy. Oh, he's a jerk, or he's the one that didn't say anything. He's sick or something. And it gets into talking about, inference and how we infer meaning onto behavior. And, it leads us back into discussions about perception and how we are, the mental maps that we have in our head, and when we see things, why we react the way they do. And temperament is part of that, not the only thing. People can choose. I don't want to give you the impression that we're bound by our brain chemistry. We also have some choice, and circumstances will arise that makes us, do some things that are maybe out of our, out of what we would like to do. You have to make the bad decisions sometimes when you're the boss. Let's face it, and sometimes that goes against kind of what you wish or what you're feeling, but you've got to do it. So all that is part of the discussion, I think, on temperament and mental maps and what to do when we see behaviors that bother us and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. It's lens and that inference is really interesting um, from a point of view of uh, we all. Um, it isn't exactly what happens. The behaviours we see. There's kind of the way the person's feeling, the way they behave, the actions they take, the behaviours they take, the way that we see those behaviours, the interpretation that we have from our conditioning, from our life, and then our feeling at that time, if we're feeling particularly raw or particularly exposed or something like that. So you've got, from what the actual intent is, you've got 4 or 5 different lenses before you end up in your brain making a decision. But then you also somehow you need to get the react and respond triggers to go, hang on a minute, remember those lenses. I've had conversations with team members, with my kids around text messages, with the way that people are behaving, and the fact that they haven't putting yourself in someone else's shoes is quite key, because then you've got to step. Well, how many steps have I got to take? You've got quite a few steps to take sometimes.
You do, and I know what we try to do in our workshops is to slow things down and start to look at each of those. But in reality, sometimes you make that quick decision and you just
Yeah,
go with it. And
yeah,
sometimes, circumstances dictate what you do. And, in 2020 hindsight, after to think about what you should have done, we all regret decisions that we've made, at times, and no different when you're the boss or you're a project manager and you've got a bunch of people doing different aspects of the project that have to be all put back together. It's a challenge sometimes. And all we're saying, with temperament is that it's a tool that the effective manager should have, and self awareness, along with, you know, emotional intelligence, understanding how power works in an organization. All of those things are important. It's not just temperament, but that's an important part of it, I think.
yeah. I agree. I agree. Um, well, just thinking, you mentioned a couple of really interesting name drops there for me, which is kind of working with NASA. And that's always quite exciting for everyone I
Yeah.
find. How was that for you working with NASA? Was it in training? Was it, and did you see? I suppose the thing is, because obviously NASA as an organisation is an incredibly high performing team.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? They land on the freaking planets that are miles away from us. Like that's a lot different to a lot of people's day-to-day jobs and that team they're managing, the teams that they're interacting. So you're going to have some strong, capable people there. How did you find anything different? What was the difference, and how did you deal with anything different when it was going?
Well, one difference with NASA is that they believed in training. And, for most organizations, a new manager or a new quote leader, not too many people are hired as leaders. Leaders, they're hired as a manager or a branch head or something, and team leader. And the leadership side is assumed that you're going to do that. And I think
Yeah.
there's, we spent some time talking about the difference between leadership and management. But with NASA, oh, and other organizations, a new manager oftentimes doesn't get training for years after they're on the job. They're assumed to know how to do it, quote, right? And their employees think they should know what they're doing day one. Uh, but I know uh, Ken Blanchard's company, his son Scott wrote the forward to the book, one of my books, Quick, I Need to Be a Leader in 30 Days, and said that oftentimes new leaders aren't good. They don't go to training for 7 to 9 years before they're allowed to go to training.
Which is
NASA,
bold.
yeah, imagine. And as he points out, Scott Blanchard points out, the first year is so important as a new manager because the positive skills that you have will stay with you, but the negative ones that you do will also stay with you for a long time. So that first year is the best time to get them into some training or some read some books about what we're talking about leadership. NASA goes right into training. So my participants, I was there for about 9 years doing training for them, and these were scientists, engineers, and administrative legal types, and they're brilliant people and very and but they faced a lot of the same issues, but they don't realize how lucky they were that they're in the classroom and the organization is investing time and effort in them at that early stage in their careers. Most organizations that I've dealt with don't do that. So on one hand, they're in the classroom earlier than most organizations, and that's a real positive thing. They're already brilliant, but they have the same challenges of temperament. They don't know. People dealing with people is a problem. Many of them are introverts because they're used to doing their own scientific work at a bench or in a lab and not work with a whole lot of people. And the people they do work with are brilliant people too. So there's a lot of introverted airs that are in there. Fires, they need those to be quick thinkers. And what about this? How about this? Let's try this. This, innovation. So you get a real mixture. For me, I was surprised that there was such a good breakdown of all four temperaments in our classrooms through the years. But they face a lot of the same issues. One of the issues they face um, was taking time off. They felt they had to be linked into their organization at all times. So we would have their supervisors come in to do a discussion or something, and it's uh, the work life balance is a big issue with them,
Yeah.
where they're so involved with work and their careers that if they take time off, they feel they're losing out. They're losing their connections. They're losing their place in the promotional
Yeah.
lineup or something. So it's hard for them to take time off and relax, even though their bosses will come in and tell them, "Yeah, turn your phones off, take a good vacation, relax." They don't do it. They're linked back to their organization on their phones all the time. We couldn't. I don't think I remember them kind of buying into that idea hardly at all.
Do
Uh,
you, do you think potentially that is, it's a little bit like there's not a lot of people who, I'm assuming here, yeah, that could perform at the level they do in that kind of organisation, with it being just a job. And it's more than a job; it's a vocation. Do you know what I mean? They feel part of something. They feel like they've got a mission. They're working on a 20-year mission to launch something, or 10-year mission, and you can't. work on something with that long a goal, just I'm doing the job, I'm turning up, I'm going home. You've got to be invested in that end place. And therefore, being, it isn't about the job, it's about their identity as someone who's landed that rover on Mars or has upgraded the Hubble telescope for the. Is it? Do you think it's? Oh, maybe you had these conversations, but that is where the need that where it's coming from really is that drive to do that.
There's definitely a commitment. Outside of NASA, a new manager would probably have three or four, even five jobs throughout a career. The NASA people, they they don't hop around unless it's to a different lab or a different NASA
Yeah.
place or project. They'll move projects, they'll move around like that, but it's all inside of the organization. Um, so that commitment is definitely there, as you say. It's obvious, and it's just amazing the brilliance. You go around the room, and as they introduce themselves, and oh, it looks like a young woman, early 20s, and what's your job? Well, I'm an astrophysicist. Oh, okay. Moving moving along. The brilliance is just it's just stunning. But you try to
Yeah,
leave it at the door. Hey, leave those degrees at the door as you come in, as we learn to be better managers and leaders.
yeah, and those sort of things can get in your way, can't they? But they can also, if with that level of, if you can apply the level of intelligence to self-reflection and self-evaluation that they obviously have to as part of their jobs, that as science and engineers, you've got a level of skepticism of going, right, if I'm going to build this thing, how can I stop it working? What is going to stop it working? Have that skepticism, have that analytical mindset, but to you as a human, that
Yeah.
can become part of it, can it, and help you do that. Yeah,
Intellectually, they can understand the models right away. They can
yeah,
understand the concepts around temperament, but it's the practical application is what they're lacking. And
yeah,
so putting them into role plays, and we do a lot of interactive kinds of things in our classrooms that they get them rolling. And that's what I think they got the most out of. I could introduce the concept, they understand the model, then we do a practical application of it, and then the debrief of it is was kind of the most important thing. How they were feeling when they were doing it, what ticked them off by others, the behaviors that they saw, what's the takeaway, all that. So that's why it was fascinating to work at that organization.
brilliant, brilliant. So just bringing it round to specifically my project management audience, and obviously you've got your experience in project management, you've been training project managers and people like that. If we think about someone's out there, whether they're a new project manager or maybe they're an experienced project manager with a new team, how could they use your your temperament model? What would you so simple things that you would say to use now and how
Uh,
the
yeah,
next 30 days so to be a better lead quick I need to be a leader as it says
yeah, yeah. Well,
by the
that's kind
book.
of why
No,
we wrote. That's why we wrote that book. Yeah. Besides buying by book, um, I think a project manager needs to be more self-aware and start to figure out what's ticking them off about their other team members, the project team members, and it helps to do um, once you do the quiz for an example on the website, and you say, oh, okay, I'm a dominant earth. Yeah, you're right. I like to be practical, and I want to see I have deadlines, and my team needs to meet my deadlines, and we've got to make reports. And gee, my this guy I think is a fire because he hates to write reports. He doesn't do a good job. I got to correct them when they come in. And it's like, maybe I need to not have that person write that report. Maybe I could share that. I could maybe rearrange my work plan a little bit to take advantage of what I'm seeing in the behaviors of my team. So, that would be a quick thing to do to kind of get into it. So it's first understanding kind of the concepts behind it, and then kind of starting to apply it a little bit. Now you don't want to go to the extreme and say, "Oh, you're a water. Uh, you are people per stop taking so much time at on the coffee uh, cups and get back to work because I know you want to sit and chat because you're a water." That would be an abuse
Yeah.
of the tool, right? So you don't want to overdo it. It's just a tool to. It's mostly for you as the manager to understand your team and yourself.
Yeah, I can, and I know that I've had conversations with Dr. Ruth Pierce around her. It's slightly different with positive personalities things where they would do analysis there and look at positive personality traits and have the things, what do you do brilliant? And then go, well, no, you should do that because you're brilliant at that. And whereas it can flip the other way, can't it? And be careful with it. I suppose you can use it for fun with that. And the question is, I've always, certainly with project managers who I've been coaching, I've always tried to share this model with them. Um, in fact, more than that, anyone really. And this kind of model again, it was kind of a different. It'll echo with people that will achieve the same thing. Which is the most important thing for me is that self-reflection and
Right.
looking at yourself and how can I do something different or how can I think differently about that person's behaviour to actually adjust and be better at what we do and help them be better by coaching them in when you do that people can think this because people don't always know that how their main temperament behavior is. They wouldn't know how that can affect someone else unless someone tells them. And it's how you as a manager can go, look, when you're doing this and you're being chatting out with people, people think you're not working. Or could I know you're not? You know what I mean? Probably better
Well,
ways to
no,
deliver that, but it is
you know,
about teaching people the perception that's there and them understanding why that perception's there. So sharing these kind of models helps people be self-aware.
that's basically that's the job. It's to make
Yeah,
people, more aware. That project manager who does works to these long hours and takes everything on his or her own shoulders. Hey, think about delegating some of this to somebody else who might be able to do that,
yeah,
and that makes everybody happier when they're contributing more. You're doing a little bit less, perhaps, than you feel you have to do. So it's all about learning to be a better leader, a better manager, and this is I think, a very helpful tool for it.
I think I agree. I think it's another lens, another way of looking at these kind of things and thing. And I'm gonna, well, I always like these things anyway. So I'm kind of preaching to the converted with this sort of stuff, and I like a new idea on this sort of this trying to understand me and trying to understand other people because that's where I am, and that probably says something about which one of these symbols I would end up being. So I'm going to jump on that on your website and do the quiz later
Yeah.
on today or tomorrow and get that sorted, and see what we get there. Like I said, I'll stick that. Um, your link to your website onto my
Right.
website. I was just thinking, is there anything you wanted to have a chat about? Because obviously we go down a few little rabbit holes there that you wanted to mention. You think would be really key before we wrap up today?
Well, Nigel, I really appreciate the time, and it was so much fun chatting with you today. Um, yeah, I've spent a lot of time in thinking about leadership and management, and I've been able to do a lot of this around the world, and I've even done temperament workshops throughout the Pacific, and got reactions from people from very different culture, and they all seem to react positively to it and look at it as a nice little tool. I try not to make too big a deal over it, just as one of the tools that managers should have in their toolbox. My books, there's 6 books on leadership, and I have a new novel that just came out that I've tried to apply leadership principles to the main characters in a book about pirates and migrants and out in the on an island called Finding Eden. I hope people take a look at that as well. But it's been
Right,
fun.
excellent.
Yeah, it's been fun to kind of do leadership and try to put it in a different format.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. Do you know what? I've got another interview with a friend of mine, Tammy Watchorn, next week, who published a book last year called The Change Ninja, which was based on I don't know if you remember, a few years, but when there used to be the adventure books. So you go through a book and you choose what to do next, and then it take you to another
Oh,
part of the book. And so
uh,
she's done that, but it's about change management and going through a change in an organization and choosing different ways to do it. Which again, I always like the different. Those are really useful ways again for embedding this kind of knowledge because it gets you that storytelling that we're storytelling and story hearing creatures,
yeah,
aren't we? So
we are.
it works really well. So that's brilliant. So what I will do is braddude.com, which is dead easy for anyone to list to remember there, but I will put the link in the show notes for the quiz and stuff like that.
Thanks.
And other than that, what's the best way people can get hold of you? Is it mainly the website, or is there where are you most active? Should I say?
Yeah, I would say the website. We've got linkages. We've got podcasts. We've done talking about different elements of leadership, and especially with temperament. But the braddude.com is the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Brilliant. Well, again, thank you so much for something that's just set off a load of flags in my head again about doing some a bit of self reflection for myself again. I have another lens to this, so thank you for that. And I'm sure a lot of my listeners will be doing the same. So thanks very much for spending the time with me, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Cheers.